Working Cows Podcast, episode 170.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast. Really excited to be joined today by Curtis Evelo. He is a rancher from Montana. He also does some body work or works on cars, fixing them up when there's a collision of some sort. But we're going to talk to him about how he's gotten started leasing land. We're going to talk to him about a new piece of property he's got where they're trying to get some soil health and soil fertility started up and kind of reboot some land that's been abused and neglected over the years. And that fits well with something I also want to make you aware of. The 5th annual South Dakota Soil Health Coalition Annual Soil Health Conference is coming up virtually this week, January 6th and 7th. If you're hearing this on the week that it releases, on the day that it releases, you got a couple of days to get over to workingcows.net/170, the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/170, and you can get registered there, and you can sign up, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from guys like Jimmy Emmons, an Oklahoma farmer and rancher, and a Leopold Conservation Award winner, Lauren Steinlage, Dale Strickler, Nick Jorgensen, CEO and CFO of Jorgensen Land and Cattle. They save $100 per acre and $350 a head while improving natural resources through grazing of cover crops and other soil health practices that they are implementing there. There's a bunch of other people that are going to be there, a bunch of people that are involved. Pretty neat format. They're using the Hoover platform for this, and there's a lot of interaction trying to recreate some of that actual in-the-room conference feel, Q&As and lobby-like atmospheres to interact with people. So pretty neat opportunity. Encourage you to head over to workingcows.net/170. Check out the link in the flyer there and get registered for the 5th annual Soil Health Conference put on by the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, virtually occurring this week, January 6th and 7th. But for now, let's talk to Curtis about what he's doing to improve his soil there in Montana. Curtis, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, Clay, it's good to be here and good to visit with you. I don't know what the weather's doing over there, but we just started getting a big snowstorm here. So,
yeah, no, we are smack dab in the middle of a winter drought, which I guess everybody around here is fond of saying, if you're going to have a drought, this is the time of year to have it. But we dried off in August, real dry at the end of August and dry through September. We had a good shot of about a foot of heavy wet snow at the end of October, and that's really the only moisture we've had. So, we are in a very brown Christmas, staring down the barrel of a very brown Christmas here. So, nothing in it. I mean, forecasted high, I think the next couple of days, we're recording this on December 22nd, forecasted high for Christmas, I think, is in the 40s or 50s. So we'll see, but we'll see what happens. Yeah. So, yep. Yeah. But it's a kind of an exciting time for my wife and I. We're just finished up our first season of management on a piece of land that we bought and moved on to last October, and have been able to implement some swath grazing and got some bale grazing set up for later when we go to Ranching for Profit in January 17th through the 23rd. So we got that all set up and getting to implement some of this stuff. And so I guess you have recently moved on to a new place or closed on a new piece of land and started some of these, or implementing some of these management practices that you've been doing on other places over the years. So could you just tell me a little bit about your history of management and your context that you guys are in, where you're located, and what's the place like?
Sure. Yeah, we're on the west side of the Mission Mountains. We started in St. Ignatius, and now we've just purchased a place up in Ronan, Montana, just west of Ronan. But in St. Ignatius, we ended up over the years. We ended up getting a herd, buying a herd of cows, and we had our own property there, which was actually only 30 acres. And then we leased a 70, and then we leased another 80. And through that, we grazed our cows in a management style. We just kind of picked it up from an actual friend of ours named Tom Gingrich. And he showed us kind of some pathways of how to do it. And he really followed Jim Garish and Greg Judy and followed their principles. And so we kind of picked up on a lot of that stuff. And we started doing a lot of those same principles. It hasn't been roses. We've had our fails. We moved on to one. We leased one piece of ground that when we ate it down, when we ran the cows across it, the grass actually went into kind of almost a shock, like it was actually getting activity. And it actually took a while for the grass, took a year for the grass to actually respond to being ate. And so that really was not what we had expected when you read Greg's books and you read some of this stuff and you try to figure out the mob grazing and managed grazing aspect of things. You don't expect it to do some of that stuff, to go into shock. So we actually started feeding the cows that year really early, and that really kind of put a bind on us. And it taught us a lesson. But by the following year, we actually had good growth on it, and the grass, there was some other grasses that came up through it and really actually started responding better for us. And we were able to maintain and manage the cows on those pieces of property actually fairly well.
Yeah, we're experiencing similar things here. This land that we're on has been hayed forever, and incidental cow impact at best, I would say, and not necessarily managed cow impact either. So we ran 70 or somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 animal units, yearlings and some crippled cows, and then our cow-calf pairs across it this summer, and kind of tried to hit every acre that we could, and they were on 2 to 5 acres every day or every other day, and so it was kind of an opportunity to try and get some even graze on all of it, and hopefully some manure and urine. And we saw some of that too, where that stuff that we started off on, pretty much all cool season grass, and I would be hard pressed to find anything but crested wheat out there. That stuff really never grew back, and so that's where we're gonna hit with our bale grazing, and then we're gonna start in another corner, and that stuff that we hit first last year will be some of the last stuff that we hit this year. So if everything goes to plan, Lord willing, and all that. So I don't know, but that's kind of the idea. So you talked about learning some lessons when the grass was in shock, and you started haying the cows early. What were some of those lessons that you learned there?
Well, it was mostly you come across the ground, and you at first you start out being real precise on how you want, how straight the lines are, how, where your electric fence is, and how it all is supposed to look. And you want to be grazing within these little square paddocks, and so the first couple of days you're kind of going into these pastures, and you're thinking, okay, this is going to get us, a day or a day and a half or 2 days worth of grazing on it. And you come back a half day later in the evening, and you're like, holy cow, the grass is all gone. And so then you got to make the decision: do you move the cows that night into the next piece, or do you wait and let them go into the next morning? So if you move them that night, by morning you're having to move them again, and so you're trying to battle a little bit of that management with that, where you've got decent grass cover, but the cows are basically eating ahead of you fast enough that you can't really move through. So those were kind of some of the lessons that we had to learn, and looking back at it, there was a lot of weeds within some of those pastures that some of the cows just wouldn't even trample it. You couldn't even get the trample factor. And so we started coming up with an idea to change it up to where when you open it up, you would open up the line wherever the larger patches of weeds were through it, to kind of force them to just trample over that. And so we started learning those things as we went on throughout the year, and that really helped us. There's a lot of people around the area that said, "Oh, the cows will never eat those weeds," and there's times where you come back and the weeds are completely stripped, and all you got is the stem of a weed sitting there, and some of the grass is still standing. So it kind of depended on what really nutrients they wanted to pull out.
How did you guys get started in just with cows? Is it generational? Is it were you guys the first ones to own cows in your family, or how'd you guys get started?
Well, my grandpa, on both sides actually of my family, lived in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and that's where my family grew up. My one family of my name was on the east side of Aberdeen, South Dakota, and my other grandpa of my mother's name, it was on the west side of Aberdeen. So and so grew up in agriculture with them, and there was various things. They had agriculture businesses, they had animals, they had cows, they had, in fact, my one side of the family had Hereford cows, and then also had hogs and hog barns and a big hog operation. So being in agriculture was kind of part of it and part of me, and I just loved all of it. And my dad moved over here, started a trucking company in Missoula, and so that's kind of where I was born. I was born here in Missoula, and just always loved cows, loved part of it. Always was involved in a lot of people, friends and family that had cows and horses and stuff, and so always part of it. But really, it kind of skipped a generation, and we just started picking up the cows. What ended up happening is I raced motocross for a long time, and was doing it semi-pro and pro, and then got injured and kind of was bored, needed something to do, and so I figured, well, I'll go get some cows, and so we just got a few cows and started with that, and then that grew into more and more of a, well, I kind of like this. Let's get some more cows, and so that's kind of how the story went. And so then we moved from Missoula, Frenchtown area, and bought a place up in St. Ignatius. And from there, then we actually bought a gal's herd that she was actually going to go to college, and she had accumulated a herd. A decent sized herd, a herd of 30 mother cows and a couple of bulls. And she was looking to sell them so she could pay her way through college. And so it kind of worked out good for us, because we ended up giving a down payment to it. And then for the next 4 years, we would give her the allotment of broke the payment out into 4 different years for her. That kind of worked out for her and for us. And then, so that's how that worked.
In that timeline, were you introduced to Greg Judy and Jim Garish and those guys?
Well, that was kind of right in the beginning of me being interested in cows. I actually run across Tom Gingrich. He was it was pretty nice character. Ran into him at the fair one day, and we were kind of I just happened to be standing there looking at some cows, and and he started talking about them, and that's come to find out those were his cows. And so we got into conversations, and the more and more conversation we got, I was like, well, I want to come look at some. And so I went over there and looked at his place, and I bought a few cows from him. And I noticed when he was doing it, he had, I think there was probably 70 or 80 head of mother cows on this 10-acre field for these at this place. And I'm like, holy cow, there's a lot of cows here. And he's like, yeah, they'll be off of here in another couple of days, and they'll be moving over to this place. And what he was doing was he would find in the local area where he was at, he'd find the housing developments that had 10, 15 acres each. And then he'd go around, if they didn't have animals, he'd go around and he'd offer to graze that down for them and just be able to manage through it and help them be able to manage their grass rather than having to cut it or anything like that. So he actually was doing this in kind of, 10 to 15 acre increments through subdivisions. It was actually kind of cool, and people just loved it because the cows, he'd herd them through with the horses and run them into their places or whatever. And the only problem he ran into several instances was getting water to them. And so he taught, for that probably 6 months or so, he kind of really taught me. I'd go down there and visit, and we'd hang out. He really taught me how to do it, how to manage them cows through some of that stuff. And I really started getting intrigued by it. So he handed me Greg Judy's Comeback Farms book. And so I took that in and started reading it and everything. And so it was in my mind, okay, this is what we're going to do. But I never put it into full practice for a year and a half while we had the beginning start of the cows. And then as we moved up here, up into St. Ignatius, I was like, okay, now we can put it into practice. We got irrigation. We got the good grasses up here. We got the capabilities of being able to rotate through and follow through with irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. And so it really worked out well for us the first year being able to do that. And that was until we started getting a bigger herd. Once we got the bigger herd, then it was time to start managing some bigger pieces of ground. And so up where we're at, that's kind of the benefit that we have. We can actually run, a cow-calf pair, a unit on an acre. You can actually, in the summertime, there's sometimes when you can run 2 units an acre just to keep up with the grass. So we do have that capabilities here to where we can run more cows on our ground just because of the irrigation.
Have you guys pursued leasing irrigated land? Has that been kind of part of your business model throughout your history, or how much of a role in what you guys are consuming with your animals has that played?
Yeah, we try to find as much irrigated ground as we can to lease up and to actually work with. And there's a lot of places that if it has a wheel line or if it has a pivot or any of that stuff, forget about it. Somebody else has already got it leased up. Usually the flood irrigation is usually what we end up leasing more than anything, because a lot of people don't want to mess with it. They don't want to mess with the flood irrigation aspect of it. And I can understand that, and I can fully agree with that in some ways, but it also becomes a management tool where you got water close by. You can manage that fairly easily with electric fence. Run the tarps out one direction and move the cows to another side, and you got instant water for them to drink. So there's some definite pluses to it, but it also becomes a physical thing that you have to really get through.
So are those leases of flood irrigated ground, do they tend to be cheaper than the pivot irrigated for you guys?
Oh yeah. Most of the time, if it's a wheel line or a pivot irrigated, if it's at all flat, the hay guys will snatch it up, and you won't get it for a long time.
Yeah.
It's tied up for many years, which, you don't blame them. I kind of looking at the same thing my own way, is we got to start looking for some of that stuff ourselves. My son and I, he wants to start actually building a business of being able to do his own hay and custom haying for people. So that is some big stuff over here because of the irrigated ground. We do have the capabilities of putting up quite a bit of hay out of this area.
And is most of that hay getting run through a horse then?
Yeah, there is a lot of this area that does do hay for horses. Us particularly won't be. We'd be mostly doing the hay for ourselves, for the cows, and then also doing hay for other cow customers, cow people. But we have talked about it, doing it into small squares just for being able to sell to horse people. That typically the horse people don't really buy the big rounds as often as the cows do. But you can actually sell 100 small square bales on a weekend or whatever to somebody, and so it does keep you busy as far as trying to distribute that hay once that goes on.
Is there a season of use that you're limited to then on that irrigated ground generally?
Yeah, there's some of them. One of the leases that we have, we end up using it pretty much all year long. We might give it a break as far as grazing wise for a couple of months, but that actually ends up being a really good piece because the people that we lease it from are there. They're there all the time at their house. And so what ends up being is we send over our yearlings. We'll send over our yearling heifers over there, and the guy that owns it just loves having the cows there. And so he'll feed them, he'll play with them, he'll throw out treats for them and stuff. So when they get done there, they're spoiled rotten. But it's good because the grass will close off one side of the pasture or whatever, and keep them in a smaller area. But they actually maintain and do good, and they plump up and look well when springtime comes around. In fact, it's kind of like sometimes those heifers look better than the ones that we're feeding out with hay and the mineral blocks and everything. So it's kind of one of those. It's almost like you just let the cow do what it needs to do. They know what to do.
Just one production note here. I'm sitting in my van recording this episode, and we did get a wind kicked up. So if you hear some rumbling in the background, it's just the wind rocking my van back and forth. But anyways, it's all good. I just thought if somebody was wondering what was going on in the background, that's what's happening. So I'm not under enemy fire or anything like that. But so you guys are moving cows around quite a bit to different pieces of land, or are you able to stay in one place for a number of months, or how is that working for you guys?
Well, this year created its own challenge just in the fact that we sold one property and then had to give up one lease so we could move over to this other place. And so it provided a bit of a challenge. But normally what we've done is we would normally run a moderate size herd with a bull on one pasture or one field, and then do the same on another one. So you'd end up having 2 or 3 different, basically grazing pods where they would graze through their own fields, and I wouldn't move cows, a whole herd, as far as, a large mob into each field and then graze through it and then move off. So each one would have their own basically grazing areas and have equal amount of rest on the ones that we've already ate. So I would typically stock that field to whatever I was going to be able to get back to, as long as I had 45 days before I got back to where I was already grazed before, or better. So there was sometimes we'd get back to it, 60 days. So I would just stock it at those rates, so we wouldn't end up having it. And the reason is because we were broke up by several miles. So you'd have, one lease property, there'd be one, 4 or 5 miles away from the house. And then another one would be, 3 miles away from the house, but it'd be 5 miles away from the other one. So, triangular wise, it would be logistically tough to be able to run them around, because we had a highway running right through the middle of everything. So some of our fields were on one side of the highway and some of our fields were on another side of the highway. So that provided a little bit of challenge. But with the new property, we ended up, now we'll be able to actually run a little bit larger herd in one area, for a longer period of time once it's developed. So
what is the current infrastructure on that new property?
The new place it's 120 acres. Most of it is irrigated. And it will be, when it's all said and done, it will be, a good mix of cool weather grasses and some warm weather grasses. Right now, it was a horse property, for several years. They would run pairs on it or yearlings on it, through the summer, and graze it down. And then they'd ship everything off or sell everything. But most of the time they ran their horses on it, 365. So this place was severely horse ate, down to, it was bad. And, as much as we all love horses, if they're not managed, they can destroy some ground pretty quick. And that's kind of what ended up happening. And so what we did this year was, we ran into the same problem we ran into the very first season we started grazing lease ground. Is we run our cows through and the ground kind of went into shock. Like, oh, we're getting ate. And so it kind of stunned it for a little while. No matter what kind of irrigation water we ran to it, it just wasn't doing anything, and we kind of knew that going in, that's what we were going to have, because it just had that same look to it. The ground cover itself, it didn't have any, sod, any mat to it whatsoever. And so we knew that we knew that there was going to be some challenges in that. And so we kind of prepped ourselves for it. But we also didn't prep ourselves for, the whole COVID thing and being able to manage through that and manage through not being able to, really go and, be able to visit with people to see if we could find more ground to lease. That provided a challenge in itself. And so, we're going to get through this year, fairly well. This next spring is going to be something that we're going to have to, be prepared for putting in a bunch of seed. We're going to overseed it, here probably March, April. We'll wind up, putting down probably a lot of clover, probably get into some meadow brome and some orchard grass, but we'll probably wind up adding a whole lot of oats in with that mix just to get something in the soil. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Is it wasn't cheatgrass that was on the place. It was pretty much no grass. It was just this low-lying cover that was there, and there was quite a bit of orchard grass in areas where ditches had overrun or things like that. And when I talked to some of the neighbors down around here, when they saw the wheel line going and stuff that my son and I got going, et cetera, and they'd stop by and, man, that wheel line hasn't moved in 5 years. It's the first time that any hand line's been put out in 5 years. And so you start getting this picture painted, like, well, now we're starting to see why the ground was the way it was. It's because, it kind of, I don't want to say neglected, but just didn't get the care that it needed to survive with those cool weather grasses. It kind of went into dormancy, and if it wasn't going to get fed with the water, then it just went into dormancy stage. And so this fall we had the NRCS out, and Ben, our NRCS director here, he was really good. He looked at everything and he was like, we'll have to overseed it. We'll have to get something going on it. As far as seed wise, broadcasting it rather than trying to drill it. And he thought that was a really good idea, is to broadcast seed it. And so we're going to try some new things on this place, rather than just trying to go another year without having some production on it. We're going to try to actually force some production out of it by broadcast seeding pretty heavy, and breaking it up that way.
And will that broadcast all be done at the same time? Will it be done just ahead of a move of cows onto that place, or how are you guys going to manage that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are some pastures. There's a 40-acre piece that's almost directly straight behind the house that we're going to actually go out, because it has been basically into dormancy stage for a long, long time. And so we're going to go out and, we're going to actually go out with the tractor, run the broadcast seeder, but we're going to put a harrow about 50 to 60 foot chain behind it. And we're going to broadcast seed that in and not let the cows go on it until we start seeing, between your knee or so high forage that's going to be on it. And we're going to try to put in there on that 40-acre piece. We're going to try to do oats, radishes, and turnips, and try to actually get some nutrients back down in that soil. Run across it, graze across it with the cows, and then pretty much keep them off of it until late fall. And wait for them forages to come back again. The other pieces, they were decent enough this summer, that I think capitalizing on some of the planting in some more orchard grass and a lot more clover, just trying to get some root down into it, some red clover, trying to get something to bind in there. I think that's going to probably be one of the bigger keys. Once we grazed across it, and then we started irrigating it on another 60-acre piece. It's kind of actually a pretty large piece. We saw some growth coming back, after we come across it. So we were grazing through, say, knee-high orchard grass, some timothy, some of that. But it wasn't real condensed and nice and tight and really good forage to come across and be able to rip across it. So, but we had a good bit of meadow brome, which was really odd. So when we were grazing it, the cows would actually graze down the meadow brome and just trample the other stuff. And I'm just, anybody that's into soil health, you're wanting that trample, and that's what we were trying to get to. And so some midsummer or so, we were actually trampling a lot of that grass. Well, later in the fall, when Ben came out, we started looking at it, and we actually started seeing, he pulled up some plants, and you could see where the roots were actually starting to travel sideways. And so he says, what we've done by doing that is exactly what we've all talked about as grazers, is be able to get the trample and be able to get that thing to basically make more plant. And so that's what we were seeing right then and there. So just even in 1 year of just being able to graze across the ground by grazing it, and putting water back to it, we were able to start seeing some results.
Did you guys were able to put cows on right at closing in June?
Yeah, actually, we were able to. We actually were able to put the cows on right around the middle part of June, right around June 15th, 14th, somewhere in there. It's when we were able to put some cows on here. And at first, what we ended up doing, it's kind of funny. Got some, we actually live way out back, and there's on the end of the back road there, and there's one ranch that's just down behind us, about a mile down the road, and some other people kind of travel up and down the road. Not very much traffic. Probably see a car maybe every couple of hours go by. And so what we did when we first got the cows here, the corrals all along the side of the dirt road were just so overgrown with either weeds or grass. You just couldn't see nothing. And so I wound up putting electric wire and hot wire right out alongside the dirt road, and just made the cows actually graze the ditch banks all the way down the whole mile of driveway, or mile of dirt road right alongside the property line, and then graze them back into the corrals, and grazed all the weeds down and the grasses down and stuff, so we could actually see what we had. And so we were using the cows. That's one of the things that winds up being when you're grazing cows like that, you can use them as a tool to help be able to do what we just did, be able to see what we have on our property just by grazing them out there, put electric fence along there. These cows are fully trained to it. I mean, you can have a hot wire out there and not have it on, and 99% of the cows will respect it. Of course, you'll always have that one that'll step over it if it's not, but most of the cows will respect it even if it's not on. But by training them for the years that we have, they just have picked up on that's what the routine is. They're to go in and clean these areas and help us help make these areas to where we could actually see what we have. We did it with on a piece of ground that had trees. And so they had big aspen trees and cottonwoods and stuff. And we wanted to be able to go in and clean up that area, and get rid of all the deadfall, all of that stuff. And so we just put electric fence around it and just kind of grazed right through all that stuff, making them clean all that up for us. The only thing that was kind of a challenge at that point was actually moving the water for them, making it to where we could actually keep them in that area. But I'll tell you what you ended up with was having the ability to see what you have in those areas, clean those areas up. You provide kind of a savanna for them. The next year you come back, you got this beautiful, nice grassy area that's really cleaned up. All the branches are picked up, all this deadfall is gone, and you're able to have more grazing area. So it winds up being good for them. They understand it. The cows are smart.
I've heard Joel Salatin say, through modern technology, we have the ability to put an accelerator, a brake pedal, and a steering wheel on the cow now with electric fence. And I can't tell you how many times I was tempted to take some net fencing and run it down the side of the gravel road that runs in front of my house and graze my road ditch with my sheep, because there's just so much grass there, and it's all brome grass that around here, it goes back to brome if it isn't smooth brome if it isn't grazed, and so it's like, man, there's a lot of forage there. We could get a week or two out of that and get something better growing there. But then if I had something better growing there, the temptation to graze it would be even stronger.
For sure. Yeah. And you should have seen the looks of the people when they drive by. It's like they've never seen this before. Somebody's grazing the ditch banks. And we wanted to be able to see where what we had. And that was, we had the ditch rider come by, and he's like, man, he says, seeing them cows graze through the corrals and through that lower pasture area and along the ditch, he says, it's amazing. I can't believe you can actually see the corrals now, and you can see where you got ditches. He says, that was just awesome. So there were people that were kind of paying attention to what we were doing, and did it encourage them to do that themselves or do something? Who knows? But we could probably also be one of them crazy neighbors now. Who knows?
Well, they just got to know it's possible, and if you can show them that first, then maybe there's something else that they can do. What have been some of the keys to your business model? What have been some of the things that you have relied on throughout your time of managing cows? Leasing, managing relationships with lease lessors, whatever, lessees, tools, resources, some of the things that you have relied on that have helped you continue doing it as long as you have and continue to be successful at it.
Right. What we've done is we try to really develop a relationship with the landowner, and it works with some and it doesn't work with others, and it's okay. You got to be willing to understand that people are people, and not every one of them is going to want to, want you to do the management the way that you're going to do it. For 8 years, we managed that ground, and it was, by the time it was done, I had trefoil coming back. I had red clover like crazy. The red clover would be dang near thigh high. First time you graze through it, we had all sorts of cool weather grasses that were coming up that were not planted there. In fact, the guy that leased it before us had actually monocultured it and did it for hay. He put in oats and barley for the first couple of years that he had it, and then he did it into straight Timothy. And so that wound up being something pretty cool to see that ground come back. But after that guy leased it, nobody leased it for several years. I want to say it was 3 years. And by the time we got to it, there was a lot of weeds that were moved in and started encroaching in on stuff. And so all around, the people that were around that whole area, around that field, were, when they saw us building that back up, they were very intrigued at what we were doing. And then by the time it was all said and done, they're visiting around the fence post kind of deal. They complimented how well the cows did, and those are some things that I think really helped us along the way, is just learning how to be able to have conversations with the people, and if you have to have a hard conversation with the landowner, that's something that you really got to spend some time thinking about how you want to do it, and you don't want to do it in a irrational fashion. You don't want to just go and pull the plug on the thing right away. You want to think it through and give it some time to really to ponder. And then another thing that you do is ask them, why is it you feel that you need to do that? And,
is what you guys are doing common in your area as far as kind of intensively grazing leased land?
So we have in our area in St. Ignatius, we actually have a couple of big Amish community area. It's a big Amish community area. And so the Amish have do that quite a bit themselves, graze through. But as far as anybody outside of that, not really that common. Ben, our NRCS representative here, he has we've actually had Greg Judy here, and we've had Jim Garish here a couple of times in our area talking about managed grazing and doing those things. And it's been good, but there's a lot of people that are just set in their ways. And so a lot of guys are like, well, why should I do it? I take my, like for example, I'd take 400 cows and put them on an 80 acre and then move them off in a week, and then move them to another 80 acre. And it's just like, well, you're already doing that managed grazing. Just, that's really what you're doing, but just tighten it up a little bit. And instead of being on there for a week, be on there for a couple of days, move them around, you'll get better response. And that's what Greg Judy was really trying to get a lot of these guys to start seeing and doing and understanding. And it does work in some aspects with some people. There are some guys around here that do it with sheep, and they'll intermix. They'll do a multi-species. They'll do, cows, horses, and sheep, and graze them. But they're doing it, on a 15, 20 acre piece, and they don't have they got 10 sheep or whatever, and a couple of horses and, some cows for their own private beef. So they are doing it in their own localized, smaller operation. But as far as a larger operation, not too many are doing what we do.
Sure. Is that water for the irrigation mostly runoff from snowpack in the mountains, or where's that come from?
Yeah, correct. Yep. Yeah, it's all done. And it was, the infrastructure was built in the 40s and 50s, of course, getting the main ditches and some of the big canals built and such. And so, yeah, it's all managed by ditch riders, and that's what it is. It's all runoff coming from the mission. And so we do depend on quite a bit of snowfall and rainfall. So as you're closer to St. Ignatius, up or closer to the mountains, the Mission Mountains, you'll get anywhere between 17 to 20 inches of rain a year. As you move further out to the west of that, like where we're at now, you get less and less of it. It basically doesn't puddle up there or pile up there. The clouds don't pile up there. So we do get a little less, but the snowfall that they get on the missions is really what gets us through the year, for sure, in our irrigation.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about Jim Garish. I went to his grazing school in Nebraska, and he said that, the Pacimaroy Valley is like 9 inches of rain a year, but, they graze irrigated circles, and they're on them for way more than what the surrounding, I think, what did he say? He did say what it was. It was, like, I don't know if it was an animal unit. They were getting crazy production off the irrigated circles. And I want to say that the desert patch right next to it that didn't get any of the irrigation water was like 20 or 30 times less productive than the irrigated circle itself. So
sure.
It's crazy. Wow. When you can make it rain every 3 days. It's pretty powerful tool. So
yeah,
what's the future of the place you're on? What are you guys looking forward to? What are some of the things you're hoping to implement other than the overseeding and those things? What are some of the things you're hoping to do in the next weeks, months, and years?
Well, within the next probably, grazing season, I'd like to see us be able to get at least another month and a half of grazing out of the whole operation. But big picture, future picture is, years down the road, is to try to continually cut our hay bill. So in our area, just because of the snowfall and where we're at, it's hard to be able to graze. Once we get, 30 inches of snow, it doesn't go away. It'll form a crust, and it's hard to graze through. And when it does go away, it's just nothing but a wet mud mess. And so the cows, really, it's hard to be able to winter graze all the way through winter. But knowing that, if we can plan our process to where we're grazing through into for several years now, we've been able to graze into middle of January on our other places in our leases. This year, we weren't even able to graze into October on this place that we just bought. And so that was a huge punch in the gut for us, but we kind of knew that going in. So we were anticipating some of that, but the goal is, okay, let's try to cut our hay bill in half by next year. How's that going to look? What are we going to implement? How are we going to do this? Are we going to have to destock? Are we going to have to find another lease, try to find something there? Another lease, you're talking about, okay, these are the dollars that we're going to spend on a lease piece. Is that more beneficial to do that, or is it more beneficial to actually buy hay, to actually then graze the hay? So you're lining hay out in areas, getting a manure impact, getting the hay impact, so on and so forth, introducing maybe some other seeds in the whole situation. These are the things that we've tried to weigh out. And really, I think if we can cut our hay bill in half within the next year or two, that's going to be a pretty big goal, I think, to get to, without destocking. That's our end goal. We want to still be able to serve our customers. We do quite a bit of selling our own beef, to people, direct to customer. We do ship some on the truck to different feed yards, but we want to try to keep a customer base. And so our goal here is, I want to cut our hay bill in half as soon as possible, but also double our customer base for our own beef. So we'll be grazing essentially more cows by the time it's all said and done, but when you're grazing the yearlings and the steers that you want to finish. So there is going to be a balance there of how are we going to do that? How's that going to look? And we're kind of looking into some other options for us of how we can maybe make that work. And we just haven't really pinned a lot of that stuff down for ourselves, as far as, like say a 4 or 5 year plan out. Things are changing so fast, rapidly in the culture today that, I see us needing to fulfill a customer base, beef distribution base faster than I think we're going to be able to keep up with it. I think that's going to be one of our problems. And so what do you do there? Do you buy some more calves from people? Do you how do you do it? Right? What's it going to turn? How's it going to look? And so these are the questions. These are the things that we've actually had to sit down and actually talk through them. What are we going to do, and how are we going to face that? Because we got to think ahead, and know where we're going to be sitting. So that provides a little bit of a challenge.
What are some of the indispensable tools for you guys there? What are some things that you, so to speak, can't live without as grazers and managers of land, animals, people, and money?
A well-trained cow is one of the most valuable tools you could ever have. Having the ability to have good quality equipment, as far as a good box, a good power box. We do most of ours with Staffix and have just a battery, and we just have a charger that we put the battery on it. And so having good reels, good posts, and having the ability to have cows that are trained. And what's unique about it is you can have, a group of cows come in that you bring in to help graze some stuff down. The cows that you've already trained and developed, they actually teach them other cows how to do it rather quick.
Sure.
Just by nature of what it is. So the value in having good equipment, buying the cheap white posts at your Cenex or whatever, it might get you through. If you run out and you need to add some more, it might get you through. But by the time winter comes around, every one of them's broke, and you lost all the stakes, and it just becomes a mess. So good value is in the posts. We've run into some times where we've had to, buy the cheaper wire and stuff, and we've gotten through, and it lasts for a year or two, maybe 3. But you always try to achieve that goal by getting the good wire, the polybraid and stuff. But, I would say probably the best is a good box. We have a 1.5 jewel and a couple of 4 jewel boxes, and that's what we do. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. you can go into a place that has broke down fence posts and barbed wire hanging down everywhere, and people are still amazed that you keep all the cows in because you got one wire of electric fence, and that just comes down to having a good trained cow.
Yep. So what do you prefer for reels and posts and wire braid?
Well, we use what do they? It's been a while since we bought a reel, but we used the O'Brien. They were the O'Brien at that time, the geared 3-to-1 reels.
Is that Terragate?
And we have, Terragate, and they are just a valuable tool, and they work well. That's how long it's been since we bought them. So we've got a mega reel. We've got one mega reel, which my wife hates to carry, but she loves the fact that she can go wherever when she's stringing it out. Yeah. But she hates to carry it. Yeah. So it's that, and then the one that I always give my son is the 1-to-1 reel, and he's mad at me every time I go run this out. Get me the other one. So it's always fun. It's always entertaining around here. But, because we run a unique cow, for the most part, when we're grazing our cows, we just run a regular O'Brien step-in post, and we keep it fairly low. A lot of guys run the pigtails and we'll put it up high. I like to be able to just step right over my wire. And so I train the cows to respect the lower wire. And here's the crazy thing is I can have a bull on the other side of that wire with cows in heat, but they've been trained enough that wire is like a wall to them, and they won't even mess with it, even with it down low. So I'll have them around, like, say, my knee high, and that's all the higher I need it. And it actually is really, really nice to be able to have that ability.
Very good. Well, Curtis, I appreciate your time today. If we haven't left too much or too many big nuggets on the table, I'll let you go, but I really appreciate your time today.
Well, Clay, it's been good, and I certainly enjoy listening to the podcast, and I've been with you since the 90s. So since
episode 90.
Yeah. Yep. So,
gotcha.
But that's where we've been from. So I appreciate it, and I thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. Have a good day. Good stuff there, Curtis. Really appreciate his time today, and really looking forward to next week for episode 171 of the Working Cows podcast. We're going to talk to Peter Ballerstedt. He is at Grass Based on a bunch of different platforms, and he's talking about grass-based health, and we'll have a bonus episode for the Patreon supporters on grass-based health and what he's talking about with therapeutic low-carb diets and low-carb eating and different things like that. But the main thing that we're going to focus on in the episode is we're going to talk to him about Liebig's barrel, or the short stave principle, or the idea that no matter how healthy all of the other sectors of your farm or your soil are, the shortest or the least healthy thing is going to be the limiting factor. And so we're going to talk to him about how he's observed that, what that means to him, and how we can change the way we think about those things to start improving the limiting factors on our operations. So looking forward to that. Again, Soil Health Coalition, South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, 5th Annual Soil Health Conference virtually on January 6th and 7th. Head over to workingcows.net/170 to find the link to register and a flyer to see what's going on. Looks like a great opportunity. So we'll see you next week with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.